Well, hello there and welcome back to Faith, Culture, Politics in Australia. I'm Mark Neugebauer, your host. Wherever you might be joining from, whether it be on the Rumble, on YouTube or X, wherever this is streaming from, please consider subscribing and or liking the content and sharing where possible. And obviously the videos go through on those platforms, but if you do want to follow along on some of my writings, you can also do that via Faith, Culture, Politics website on fcpaustralia.com. So be really happy if you joined along there and followed some of the writings that I put together in my blog, my personal views on what's happening in Australia in regards to faith, culture and politics. But today my guest is someone that I had on just before the recent South Australian state election. He is a member of the Family First Party of South Australia. He was a candidate in the Legislative Council, running number 2 on the ticket, Christopher Brohier. I'm going to be catching up with him today to do a bit of a recap of the election and talk into a few things. And just for full transparency, I am a member of Family First Party and I also voted Family First Party. So for full transparency, I just need to let people know that as well. So Christopher, welcome to the stage. Good to see you again. It's been a little bit of water under the bridge since we spoke last time, but we were kind of pretty hopeful before the election. We talked into quite a few things in regards to where we are in our country in regards to culture, where we sit with our Christian faith, and obviously how that all ties into politics. And clearly now the dust has settled from the election, and the results are, primarily in a lot of cases. I think the Legislative Council has still got some bit of tidy up work to do to find that final spot, I think, which a lot of people are predicting could go to Labor, but you might be able to have a bit more of an idea on that as well and some input on that. But I guess I wanted to just quickly kick off. You obviously there was some media alerts that I followed after the election with Family First, and Lyle Shelton's obviously your I believe national president. Is that the title for Lyle for Family?
National director.
National director. So obviously he had some things to say. He was obviously very, very disappointed. It was a massive campaign. He shared his thoughts on there, talked about, had a few posts there on the Family site, Family First Party site, reflections on the South Australian election. So there was obviously some disappointment there, but from what he was saying, there was a lot more, I guess, funding available for the campaign and everything. But I guess if I just reflect quickly on 2022, it was only about 1 year after kind of the re-emergence of Family First under the new kind of structure. The numbers looked quite promising. And what we've just seen is a bit of a fallback, obviously, from that initial 2022 result. Now, a lot of people are obviously saying that the One Nation effect is a big thing. Do you read that as really just being One Nation, or do you see a different shift in regards to, I guess, Christians, because Family First is a very Christian-orientated political party and doesn't hold back on a lot of the cultural stuff that is going on in our country and a lot of debates that are happening. What do you see is attributed to that sort of fallback, mainly from that 2022 result, where you saw a bit of an resurrection after coming back?
Yeah, so just putting that into context, I think in 2022 we got about 3% of the vote. In the federal election last year, we got just over 2%, roughly 25,000 first preference votes, and it looks like we'll end up in pretty well the same position this state election. So we held on to the vote from the federal election, but we didn't increase it, and we had to increase it to get a seat. So they're the numbers, facts, if you like. What contributed to that? I think everybody accepts that the orange wave really hurt some of the minor parties on the conservative Christian side. So One Nation a few months ago was tracking at about 19%. Taking it back even before that, before Bondi, One Nation was probably around 9 or 10%. Bondi caused a real spike, and then it was sitting around 19, 20%. And if it had been that number, then given that One Nation put Family First number 2, we would have had a real shot of getting in. But their vote climbed from, say, the month before the election to end up now at about 24.3%, which gives them 2.9 quotas at the moment on the provisional counting of first preference votes. And that means they're in all likelihood going to get 3 in the upper house. And we're sitting at 0.3 of a quota. And for that last seat, the 11th seat, the numbers now are Labor 0.4 of a quota. The Greens won't get a second seat. They're about 0.2 of a quota. Mm-hmm. And we're at 0.3 along with legalized marijuana. The Nationals are 0.1, I think. So they'll go out, and we were number 2 on their ticket, so we'll pick up some votes if the preferences hold. The Australian Family Party votes could go anywhere. So after preferences, we could end up with about 0.4, 0.5, but Labor at 0.2 is going to pick up the Greens. Greens have got 0.2 of an excess quota, and legalized cannabis, that sort of grouping, legalized cannabis, Greens, any excess votes, or the votes from SA Best, which didn't register a quota, or got 0.1 of a quota, sorry, and Animal Justice, all of that, in the end is likely to flow through to Labor. Mm-hmm. So, and it's the most likely outcome, I think, is for Labor's 5th candidate, Claire Scriven, to be elected. And that's very good, because Claire is a very good member. She's the most pro-life politician in Australia. So we were hoping to get in. We were hoping Claire would get in. So in the end, the composition of the upper house is quite good, probably the best it's been for about 20 years, looking at sort of from a Christian conservative point of view. And it looks like there'll be about 11 votes on our side on contentious moral issues where there's a conscience vote. So that's a good result. And I'm very glad that the Greens didn't get 2, for example. So on the whole, leaving aside Family First, it's a good result for South Australia in the upper house. But obviously we're saddened that Deepa didn't get in.
Yeah, 100%.
I think the orange wave was a big factor in that. Lots of people who may have voted Family First went One Nation.
Yeah, and look, I talked into that a little bit. I mean, I know Rebecca Hewitt personally, very strong Christian conservative off the farm, really decent consultant.
Very good, good lady.
Yep. And Corey Bernardi obviously has not held back on his Christian faith and where he sits in regards to some of these issues. And I do know from speaking with Carlos as well, he's pretty much aligned with a lot of that as well. So look, all accounts and purposes, and there's some pretty strong candidates within the Liberal Party that are also part of the Legislative Council that do hold those strong conservative Christian kind of values. So it'll be interesting to see this next 4 years and where it goes in regards to some of these, and whether or not the bill will be put forward again in regards to the late term abortion and let them live bill, those sorts of things, and how that looks, and I kind of just wanted to reflect on that a little bit, Christopher, and get your thoughts on this. Family First has made no bones about the fact where they stand culturally on a lot of a lot of sensitive issues in our society, you know, whether it be, you know, protecting our children from gender ideology, whether it be protecting the life of unborn and all that sort of thing. And it made me reflect, because I attended, you and I both, we saw each other at the Walk for Life event, and it made me reflect a little bit. And I think I might have mentioned this during our previous conversation, is that there's about 700,000, as per the last census, of people that identify as Christians in our state here in South Australia. Now, from all accounts and purposes, about 5,000 people that attended the rally. That's less than 1% of South Australians, and even pastors and churches. We have a lot of churches and pastors that actually didn't get out on the streets. Now, and this is what I guess concerns me. It's hard for politicians to fight the pro-life cause if there's not enough, I guess, people within our state and our culture that will actually give politicians the confidence to bring these issues up. Where do you reconcile with that, seeing that the numbers of obviously Family First, you know, dropping a bit this time around, and obviously the One Nation part is part of it? Is it a much bigger cultural issue where people are just too afraid to stand up for these type of issues? Where's your thoughts on that?
That's a massive question, Mark. One recent reflection I've had is based on Isaiah chapter 6. So in Isaiah chapter 6, the king has just died, King Uzziah, and Isaiah sees the Lord high and lifted up. And he hears the voice saying, "Who will go for us? Whom shall I send?" And Isaiah says, "Here, my Lord, send me." And we're very familiar often with that sort of tranche from Isaiah 6. But then, and this is what we don't often get, Isaiah says, "To whom shall I go?" And God says, "Go to a people who won't hear. Go to a people who would stop listening." And Isaiah says, "Well, how long do I have to keep speaking to a people who won't listen?" He says, "Until the cities be destroyed, but a remnant will remain." And the thing I've taken from that recently is that we are in a time and a place where people aren't listening to a lot of this stuff. And I don't want to criticize the church, because the church has to do what the church does, and pastors are busy shepherding the flock in a difficult environment. But as you said, the numbers reflect that people aren't out there on the pro-life cause. But our job, as I see my job personally, for someone who's moved in this area, is to keep speaking and not to stop speaking. Because it's very easy to say, well, look, no one's listening, I'm just going to stop speaking. And there's an old Chris Christopherson song saying how this man tried to discourage him from speaking, and he said, "And you still can hear me singing to the people who don't listen, to the things that I'm saying, hoping someone's going to care." And so that's, I think, what we have to do is to keep speaking. And if people don't listen, some will, because the hope from that passage in Isaiah is there's a remnant who will hear. And one can become two, and two can become four, and that's a wonderful thing. And so I think the other encouragement is that there is a movement, particularly among young men now, to seek out things of God. That's happening. I'm catching up with a young fella tomorrow for coffee who, through the internet, really started to investigate Christianity and came to faith. He's now studying at university. My son, who meets with some young fellows who are on the way to really wanting to learn about Jesus. So that is an encouragement. And they are responding to a forthright proclamation of truth in all areas. And that's what we have to keep doing in this day and age. How it works out in the future, I don't know, but I believe that there's that remnant which is responding, and so we've got to keep going.
100%. I love that. And And as we all know, his will be done in the end, at the end of the day. So we just got to keep doing what, in all of our capacities, as fallen people and as sinners ourselves, we just got to continue to do everything that we can to kind of, bring the light of Jesus out there. And I think that a lot of that comes into our messaging, how we do what we do and all that. I've had to reflect on that myself about how I talk into things as well. And, because we want to be able to bring people around us, put our arms around them rather than scaring them off. And that's obviously sometimes a real balancing act to obviously bring the Lord into it. And I just wanted to pick up on something that you just said about pastors in the church and not being too critical. Just going to play you this quick clip from Lyle just recently, just a little bit of this clip, which talks into that. He's talking to a pastor up in the Gold Coast, I think, or up in the Currumbin area somewhere. But I'm just going to play this quickly, if that's okay.
Why are you, as a pastor, so passionate about the unborn, and why are you willing to speak so clearly in public?
Well, I think it's how would you say it? This is not something we should be debating. This is not something we should be sort of covering over or anything like that. This is life and death for 90,000 Australian babies a year. Could you imagine if we took the whole of the MCC and executed them in one go? The outcry that would happen. This is happening. It's a hidden Holocaust. It's happening behind closed doors. And the church has to speak out against this. It's very clear. Life begins at conception. And so if we fail to say something, it's the same as if we held the knife and did the job ourselves. We have to speak out. And we have to get our people to speak out. And we're worried about if it's going to be popular or not. It doesn't matter. Jesus wasn't always popular. They killed him over it. So, I think we need to take the same stand.
Okay, I'm sure many of our audience will be saying we absolutely agree and be very much in admiration that a pastor of a significant church here on the Sunshine Coast is so clear about it. Why do you think the wider church is less vocal, and how can we break the silence on this?
I don't know why they're less vocal. I don't understand it. I think it's only popularity.
You and I both love the church, of course.
Yes,
we don't want to be critical of the church. We're both committed members and supporters.
Absolutely.
We love the local church, but the church is not speaking about what you say rightly is a hidden Holocaust. That's a pretty bad indictment on our silence, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's just that we're too frightened to say anything. We're worried that we will lose members, but my experience is this: if we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, all the other things are added. And I'm prepared to go to the wall on this one because it's so important to me to save the lives of unborn children. I've held in my arms through Lily.
So that kind of talked into what you were saying there. I think, Lyle, in that conversation about, okay, we don't want to be critical of the church, but we're also in the same vein, we're kind of saying, well, where are the voices from our leaders in our churches and stuff? And that's kind of, the reckoning that they all have to have themselves, I think, like all of us, what we speak to, what we don't speak into. And our church leaders are no different, but, they are, I guess, the ones that are leading the flock. And so it's a real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and I would preface by saying that the church is all we've got. And so I don't want to criticize the church. But I think that what I would encourage people who are thinking, should we speak, should we not, is two things. One is to consider that in exegesis of the Word of God in our society, you have to come up against the issue of abortion to birth. For example, in the Gospel of Matthew, when you read about about the massacre of the innocents in Matthew chapter 2, what's the application of that in our society? And I think one of the things that you're drawn to is the issue of abortion, and particularly abortion to birth. So I think if we're expositing the word and expositing it in such a way that it's relevant to the people who are listening today, then we have to do that. So, for example, John Piper preached a sermon on James chapter 4, when it comes wars and fightings among you, you ask and do not have, you lust, etc. And he said that's the cause of abortion. We lust and do not have. We want our own things, and we're prepared to do whatever to get that. So that's how one of the greats of the church dealt with that passage and made it practical. And it's my conviction that training, you might call it equipping, establishing, discipling people in our culture means we have to help people understand and learn how to live in this corrupt and decaying culture. So that's number one. And number two is, historically, the effect of the pulpit preaching boldly has been remarkable. In the book of Acts, after the apostles were threatened, they said, "Give unto your servants boldness that we may speak thy word." And of course, that led to the continuation of the church in Jerusalem and then throughout the world. But the example that I really like is in the early 1940s, when the Nazis were executing in Germany imbeciles, cerebral palsy, etc. The Bishop of Munster, who's called the Lion of Munster, got up one Sunday and preached against it. And that led to a significant reduction in that horrible practice. In the end, he was imprisoned, but he wasn't killed. He was released shortly after the war. But if the pulpits thunder on some of these things, there will be a change in society. Mm-hmm. So that's the encouragement that I offer to people who are thinking about this. The pulpits have a significant role in how we shape culture.
Yeah, 100%. And so that covers, I guess, the people, the everyday Australian, South Australian, being involved, if you're a Christian, following some through on these things, the pastors. But then Lyle also talks into fellow politicians, and in this little clip that I'm just going to show now, he talks in regards to, I think, hints at the Queensland kind of decision about censorship.
The reality is very few in politics are genuinely pro-life. Very few are prepared to stand up for the natural family, for the protection of children, for the dignity of girls and women, and even for the simple freedom to say that these things are good. Plenty of people quietly agree with us, but far fewer are willing to wear the cost, the reputational hits, the criticism, the pressure that comes with speaking out in public. And so what happens? Well, too many politicians, even those who call themselves conservative and even Christian, end up ceding ground to the radical left. Now, to be fair, the One Nation political party has done some good in disrupting a political class that has, frankly, betrayed Australians. But it also misses some of the fundamentals required for a truly flourishing nation. The reality is very few in politics.
So that's that's Lyle talking there about politicians. And I think one of the things is that I think there was some criticism in regards to Queensland. We look at Christopher Brohier doing some great work in regards to other stuff up there in the Liberal Party, but he's put a blanket, no more talking about the abortion debate. And I think there was, Lyle was quite critical. I think you're probably yourself a bit critical about that, but it covers this whole lot. So we're talking, the everyday Christian needs to, look for, pray for courage and boldness to talk into these things. Our leaders in the churches maybe need to reflect on how they do that as well. And then obviously our politicians, and we just mentioned about here in South Australia having a quite positive legislative council moving forward, hopefully. So it's really encouraging politicians to be able to speak boldly. And Lyle knows all too well, I mean, the attacks that he's had, and you're probably privy of his legal cases and the legal challenges against him about, his defamation cases and that as well. So it's a whole, it's encapsulated fully, isn't it? And that's, one of the things why I like talking about this is that's why the channel's called Faith, Culture, Politics, because they all tie in together, and it all stems from our faith, our Christian faith. So how do we continue to encourage politicians to speak boldly?
Well, South Australia is in a unique position, Mark, because we've got two of the outstanding pro-life politicians in the nation. So Claire Scriven, and she's done an amazing job. She is in the Labor Party, which is generally pro-abortion. There's a conscious vote on abortion, but she has stood up and fought tremendously on this issue. She's a shining light how someone can be in a progressive environment and still uphold the value of the life of the unborn. And then in the Liberal Party, there's Nicola Chenefante, the leader of the opposition in the upper house. Hopefully she's the leader of the opposition, depending on how the numbers go. And she proffered the Nordic model bill in terms of prostitution law reform, and she's been she was one of the leading voices with Claire opposing abortion to birth. When it was put up back in 2021, and then there are other people like Ben Hood, Sarah Gain, etc. So we've got probably the best crop in the country in South Australia, and I think for us as constituents, I think we've got to ask ourselves, how much involvement do we have with them? So I pray for Claire and Nicola, not every day, but often. And I would encourage others to do that, to uphold these good MPs, and even the ones you're not convinced of are that good in their views, to pray for them, to go and see them, to talk to them about our issues. So Tom Kenyon, who was a pro-life Labor member, minister, he lost in the Marshall election in 2018. He said something that in his, 12 years in Parliament, his minister, his priest, didn't contact him once to find out how he was going, what could be done. So we have to get involved and start seeing our members, organize little communities. You can get involved with groups like the Australian Christian Lobby and other similar groups, so that we can organize and support these people. Because if they are to fight in Parliament, they need to know the support that's out in the street. So when we were fighting decriminalisation of prostitution some years ago, I met with one of the MPs, and he said, it's great that we've now got support in the community for us, what we're doing in Parliament. So that's a big thing, that we don't just elect them and say, okay, you go and fight for this pro-life or whatever, and then get back to watching Netflix and watching the footy. If we're going to change this, it's got to be an all-in approach, and we've got to be praying every day for a change in the abortion laws, praying for our MPs, but also supporting them, writing to them, contacting them, inviting them to our home groups to talk, etc. That we're not going to change this without blood, toil, sweat, and tears. It's going to be hard work. It's going to be dispiriting work, but we have to keep going. And if we're fair dinkum, then we've got to do the work so that they are supported.
Absolutely, it's like picking up our own cross at the end of the day and getting involved in the battle. The other side tends to rally around whatever their cause is really well. In particular, the Greens Party and that. And I think we just don't do that well enough on the sort of conservative Christian side, where we kind of get together and we, I love the idea of the home groups and the bigger groups and having some meetings, regular meetings where 100 Christians come along and they invite the member of parliament that they know is supportive of some of those things, and invite them to speak and build them up and pray over them. And I think it's quite powerful, and I think we need to continue to look at doing those sorts of things 100%. I just wanted to, and I'm glad that you did bring up the Australian Christian lobby, because you were obviously heavily involved with them for a long time, and Ashland's doing a great job of leading that now here in South Australia. And they really are the organisation that goes in and talks to parliamentarians in regards to issues that affect Christians. So it's kind of finding ways to get behind them as well. Looking at becoming a member, getting involved, looking at volunteering, because they're only as good as what the community offers. You can only do so much with so many resources. So, like, if you feel compelled as a Christian to do more, then the organisations like the ACL are probably a good stop. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. We need to be organised. Somebody said a few organised people can change society. Indeed, that's the only way it's ever been done. So a few people committed who are prepared to work can bring change. And it's going to take time in the whole area of life because it's entrenched in our society. But it can be done.
Yeah, 100%. So I just want to change tack just quickly, because obviously there was a bit of talk. One Nation had a lot of groundswell, a lot of support behind One Nation, and I think a lot of that is just because Liberals and Labor and the Greens are just on the nose with, and I mean you wouldn't think that here in South Australia, because Labor's just got a good result, but overall there's people are disenfranchised with what they've been offered over the last however many decades. So One Nation seems to be that place to park the vote. And obviously they've got a lot of strong policies. There's a lot of things there, but just reflecting on even the family first policies. I mean, you guys do share a lot of policies. I mean, people think family first, it's all about cultural issues, it's all about abortion, but it's not. I mean, family first actually has got some strong policies around tax and freedom of speech is a big one. The housing policy, and I watched conversations between yourself and Deepa around a lot of the things that concern South Australians and so forth. So there's no shortage of policies where you talk into that could be very similar to what One Nation is, but yet it hasn't been able to bring across the Christian conservative vote across to you guys. So do even though the policies seem very similar, is it purely just that groundswell of people understanding where One Nation was? They already had access to the media. A lot of there's a lot of talk around them nationally. Or is it just messaging? Is that, like, from your perspective, family first, talking with Lyle and others, is it really just about your messaging and getting it out there that you care about these issues that we're talking about, the cultural, Christian issues that we're concerned about, that we see wrecking, undermining the family and that, but how do you better message to Australians, everyday Australians, that there's more to family first than just that, and the policies, there is some really decent policies to turn this country around? How do you do that?
You got to give a redhead call Pauline and get her working for us. I mean, the fact is that she carries massive star power. She does. And I think my simple reflection is that after Bondi, the One Nation vote spiked, because Pauline has been talking about this issue for years, often being abused for it. And people thought, okay, nobody else is talking about this. So that's where they went. And that's the fact. And you've got to give her credit, because she's stuck at it for 30 years. So if it wasn't for Pauline, that wave wouldn't have happened. So how do we address that? it's like, I think, when you're facing a tidal wave, you can't stop it. You've just got to wait for it to recede. And I don't know what's going to happen with One Nation, but the history of it has been a rise and fall, that they get a big vote and then a lot of people splinter off and leave. So who knows what's going to happen in South Australia? I don't, obviously, but we've just got to wait. And from the family first point of view, I think we've just got to keep saying what we're saying, keep arguing our case. And I think, like I talked before, start continuing the discussion with small groups, with little family first cells, if you like, around the electorates in the States, and keep working at it until a break happens. So we're going to have a post-mortem in a couple of weeks, sit and think about what happened, what we did, what we could have done better, what we shouldn't have done, etc. But this is just my personal reflection, so it's not a party reflection. I think we've got to keep that 25,000 votes that we got as first preference has got to be nurtured and developed, because each of those 25,000 knows 5 people. And if we can get each of those 25,000 doing something, and double the vote in the next election, then you're almost assured of a seat if you get 50,000. So it's that's hard graft work. I think that's got to be done. And then we've also got to highlight the differences with One Nation. So before the election, we kept saying One Nation is not a pro-life party, because it isn't. Its website says that One Nation believes that life begins in the womb. Now, that's a nonsense statement. Where else does it begin? The question is, do you believe life begins at conception or at some other point? And One Nation squibs on that. We have to keep highlighting those differences when we are more grounded in truth. But before the election, people just weren't listening. They made up their minds, and the Australian electorate is infallible because it is final. The people make the decision, and it's not up to us to say you got it wrong. We've got to work to say, okay, this is a better alternative. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but in sum, I think hard work is the only way we're gonna get there.
Speaking truth, and hard work, and standing by the convictions. And it makes me reflect, because something you mentioned there, obviously you talked about One Nation there, and I imagine that Family First Party has a very strict criteria in regards to seeking candidates. Now, one of the things that Lyle and I think Family First nationally were quite critical of is some of the candidates that have been, and you haven't been backwards in coming forwards and being vocal about this. And this is, standing by the convictions in regards to certain candidates. Now, obviously, one of the comments that come out, obviously, and I'll just share this, was from Family First as well. So this was in regards to a South Australian now elected member of Parliament, and now obviously links back to the sex party and rainbow activism and all that sort of stuff, and fluid ideology. So obviously they haven't held back and been able to say, look, that's fair enough. One Nation have done a great thing, but they've but also very, very cautious about the candidates they select. Now, this is something that you're obviously not looking to compromise on, either nationally with Lyle or yourself. And this also speaks into the new election coming up in Farrer. It's the same thing. The candidate in Farrer is also, obviously has said some things that you wouldn't endorse. It's about endorsement, right? So, and because obviously Family First endorsed One Nation as number 2 on the ticket all the way through, but it's still, it's about, what I see there is about being principled in regards to where you stand. As much as people see there's some great stuff that One Nation has done, but you're not too worried or scared to throw the hat in the ring in regards to saying, well, hang on a minute, this is quite questionable in regards to these candidates. Do you support that kind of, the national approach to those criticisms of particular candidates and candidate selection?
Well, if you are propounding yourself as a Conservative party, which One Nation is, then it's perfectly legitimate to ask questions like the candidate, now the member-elect, it seems, for the seat of McKillop, had a history of being part of the Sex Party and leading the vote for the yes vote for same-sex marriage, or being involved in that, and that's not a Family First thing. I think it's in the Advertiser today. There's an article about that. Or one of the majors newspapers. So it's perfectly legitimate to put those questions to the party and get their response, because if people are making their mind up on how they vote, they're entitled to know the background of the candidates who are standing. And that's not to say this gentleman may have changed his mind. He may have. I don't know. I don't know the gentleman, but they're important questions to put.
Yeah, no, this is right. And I mean, ultimately, we all come from, a place of sin. We all have to reconcile our own, thoughts and actions and views in our lifetime. And let's just say, we just pray, I guess, that, this person has changed their mind, because I guess, like you say, it's about what the electorate perceives of who they're voting for, and that is the key thing. And this is the thing, I guess, Family First doesn't pull any punches on that. Is that here you are, this is what you stand for, and whether or not that's why the current state of numbers is a reflection of that, or whether it's just because people need to be brought along with that thinking and that understanding of where that principle comes from, and that's those conversations that are going to continue to have to be had moving forward. Now, clearly, we've got 2 years before 2028. Are you aware? Obviously, we're going to look at federal members of parliament that come out of South Australia. We're going to have some senators that might come out of South Australia. Is Family First fully committed to looking at running candidates in all of those for 2028, and then obviously beyond that as well?
Yeah, so the attention now shifts to Victoria, which is October this year. And we've got a number of candidates already pre-selected who will be running, both in the upper house in Victoria and in lower house seats. After that, it's, I think, April or May next year is the New South Wales election. And Lyle Shelton's running for the upper house there. So that'll be a major campaign. And then 2028 May will be the federal election. So it's a bit early to talk about pre-selection of candidates and things, but I envisage we'll be running a number of candidates in the Senate and for a number of House of Reps seats in May of 2028. But the critical breakthrough for us is to get someone in one of the state legislatures. Once you do that, then you have a building block to build for the federal election, and that just takes time and effort. And it's the thing I've learned now running in 2 elections is it's a hard gig. It is tough work, and getting your message out there is tough work, but that's the game.
Yeah, and look, I think there's a lot more. I'm seeing a lot more, obviously, of Lyle, seeing a lot more Family First, discussions, before the state election here in South Australia. You yourself and Deepa had some good conversations. It's about things that concern people. So, and I think this is just part of it, isn't it? It's getting out there and explaining your message and saying, yes, we do care about these fundamental cultural things, but we actually also have some policies as a party, and you know, we want to be able to get that out to the electorate to say this is what we stand for. It's just like that whole package, you know, and it's really about the messaging and continuing to grow. So I guess one of the key things then is a message out to, you know, whoever it is, whether it be in Victoria or New South Wales or here in South Australia, for people that do, you know, genuinely care about some of these issues that you raise, as well as the cost of living and what's happening to our country. And, you know, there's so many things that Aussies are worried about. It's almost like they put the faith part of it, or the protection of children and all that to the side, because they're really just trying to keep their head above water with everything else that's going on. And that's the real challenge, isn't it? That's the real challenge about, you know, being able to build that base and continue to have those conversations, is because people are just really struggling, aren't they?
That's right. That's right. And with petrol at, what's it? I was thrilled to see yesterday. It was like $2.19. And who knows what's going to happen with the blockade of the Gulf, or of the Straits of Hormuz. So these are really difficult times. But in one sense, it's good, because, like my generation, I'm a baby boomer. We lived through just pretty well good times. I had the privilege of going to university in the Whitlam years, free education. So did my wife, free university education. And hardship and struggle is a good thing, that builds a different part of our character. And so we may go through that in Australia, and that in itself may drive people back to start thinking of deeper than how does it affect my hip pocket, and start thinking of the values of truth and faith, which really underpins life. And that's what makes up families, and that's what we want to propound as a family first party.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wonder if you are in a position, because I know that I did mention that you're part of, or you'll consult to the Human Rights Law Alliance in a lot of cases that that are going on at the moment. I've shared some stuff myself about it. Are you able to talk into some of the cases that are kind of really high profile? I know Dr. Amos is one of them. The HRLA is behind that. How are some of those cases going, and is Australia, are you able to talk into that at all?
I can't go into specifics. I can talk because I'm briefed in some of them, but I can give you what's publicly available and understood. So HRLA, I don't think represents Dr. Andrew Amos. His insurers are acting for him in that matter, where he's had some restrictions on his use of social media. So Gillian Spencer's case looks likely to go for trial in November this year. Lars Shelton, he won his case at first instance. There was an appeal. The judgment came down a little while ago, which said that in terms of some of the legal approaches to the question, the member at first instance got it wrong. And so Lars taken that matter to the Supreme Court in Queensland, and that'll be heard in the next, 3-4 months. So he needs prayer. It's a crazy thing. Like 7 years he's been fighting this. And then Jasmine Sussex, who's the Australian breastfeeding consultant, who's being sued for vilification. Her matter will come to trial probably the second half of this year. So they're all really important cases. Dr. Gerard Koch, his picture's up there. His sentencing hearing will be on in a few weeks. He was found to be guilty of unprofessional conduct for posting about things like abortion on social media. So it's a very hard gig for doctors these days, because the APRA watches them very, very closely for their social media output. So the space that the Human Rights Law Alliance works in is really cutting edge in this sort of litigation, and it's absolutely imperative that work continue. I was there at the start of the HRLA. It was Jim Wallace's vision, and Martin Niles and I started it back in about 2016. And it's just so important that it's there now, to have an expertise and give, as best we can, excellent representation to people in these difficult situations. And people are losing their jobs like regularly because they make a stand for a truth-based position in terms of gender and all of that. That's happening. We're dealing with these people all the time.
Yeah, well, pray for obviously the work of HRLA. Obviously, that's and the majority of people that generally do talk out on those things and have a very strong position are generally people of the Christian faith. And it's good that there's an organisation like the HRLA that is there to represent that, because we're going to see, I guess, more of that as they're looking at legislation and bills that strengthen some things. I mean, the recent one that went through last year, there's still some contention about that, about how that could be weaponised, but a lot of it is the process, isn't it, Christopher? Like, they just seem like, in Lyle talks about this and others, it's not so much, the result or whatever. It's really just dragging people through for years, not knowing where they are. It's a massive cost, a massive time and energy. I think it's Bernard Gaynor is the same. I think he's got dragged through it for a number of years with what he's talked about. So it's really just weaponising the courts against, I guess, believers that want to stick to truth-based teaching and practice. Right?
That's right. And often in these things, there are the pro bono law firms or human rights commissions, etc., that will act free for the applicant. And so the applicant, the complainant, doesn't have to pay legal fees. In Lyle's case, I think the solicitors are a publicly funded organisation, and I would love to see, if this legislation is to be present, for there to be a level playing field for people to say, okay, if one party is government funded, both sides should be government funded, and there should be some sort of cost implication. If you lose, you pay costs. And because otherwise it just makes it very, very easy for people to bring cases and run them without any personal loss. In the civil courts, what we tell people is, look, you can run this case, but it's going to cost you X amount. And even if you win, you're not going to get it all back. And that's often a great curb on people just wanting to fight for no reason. And I think we need to bring that back in some way into this whole anti-discrimination space to discourage people from just running claims and without any consequence.
Yeah, and that kind of makes sense, I guess, at a personal level, because there's a term for that, isn't it? It's a annoying litigant, or someone that just continuously litigates because there's no real cost to them, or whatever. Which I kind of understand where you're coming from if you're looking at that sort of person on person. But I still think there still needs to be a safeguard for people that don't have the money to fight the government. Like the government, if the government or bureaucrats have done something wrong, and there needs to be some provision where someone can actually take it to them, because obviously the government has an endless amount of money to be able to fight to have themselves cleared of something, right? But if you're looking at a person-to-person thing, so it's a real balance, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I was one of the barristers that ran the Cathy Club litigation against the exclusion zones around abortion clinics, and in the High Court, we had a shoestring to run the matter on, and we had every state Solicitor General except the Northern Territory and the Commonwealth against us, and it was very difficult having all those virtually unlimited resources being thrown against us. So when the state is against you, it's really tough. It's really tough, and the legislation now is so skewed that it makes it very easy for people to bring claims. For anyone challenging the zeitgeist of the day, whether in abortion or gender fluidity or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, we've just got to continue to do what we can. I mean, you and I are both here in South Australia, and I do my little bit with what I can. As I said, I come to the Lord later on in life. I'm not a cradle Christian. I've still a long way to go. I lived in the world. I'm flawed, but we continue to have these conversations and continue to encourage others to speak boldly, because this is exactly what the enemy wants, and the others, they want people silenced. They want people to self-silence. And my biggest encouragement to people is to avoid that, is to try and stand up, and I know how hard it is, and from others it's harder than others, but I think we need to, right? And for me, I'd say, well, kids and grandkids' futures are at stake if we don't. So, and I think we all need to do that in some capacity. So, look, this streams all over the country, but what would be your message, Christopher, I guess, for South Australians for the next sort of, we've got elections in other states, obviously, in that, but I think for our state, like encouraging our fellow South Australians in regards to turning things around. What's your message there?
Firstly, pray. Pray like your life depends upon it, because it does. Secondly, get involved and support particularly those members we've talked about, particularly in the upper house, but also your local member. And thirdly, tell the Premier what you think. So Peter Malinauskas is probably the most Christian-centered, sympathetic Premier in the country. And let him know what you think. Write to the Premier's office, write to his office in Croydon. Let them, and even your local members, we have to let people know what we think. Democracy only works when we are involved. And simply sitting back and waiting for another 4 years and then casting your vote it's just not enough today. If we're going to change this society, and this society it's a corrupt and decaying society. For us to bring a change, we have to be those who speak. And the great declaration that Jesus brought in the synagogue in Nazareth from Isaiah 61 said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to preach good news, to proclaim liberty, to bind up the brokenhearted, to speak and to act, to speak and to act. And then they will build up the old wastes, the desolations of many generations." So we have to speak and act, and in so doing, build up the decaying parts of our society. And that is not something I think as Christians we have any option. That's part of the Great Commission. That's our gig. We have to do it. And so let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. So we're cracking onto an hour, taking up your time, but I think we covered quite a bit there, and a bit of an overview and talking about the post-mortem of Family First and where to from here, and obviously regrouping and seeing where you go. But ultimately, it's up to the people to get involved and get behind what they feel compelled to follow. So I'm wondering whether you did have a quick prayer to finish up on, Christopher. Do you have something for us, for the audience?
Well, so I'd love to lead us in the Lord's Prayer, because the first two petitions, hallowed be your name, that God's name is lifted up and thy kingdom would come, is the key to the welfare of our state. So let's pray.
Amen.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We want your name uplifted, and we pray your kingdom would come. We think of the kingdom of God, of righteousness, justice and peace, and pray that it would come in our state. Give us this day our daily bread, and provide our needs, Lord, in this difficult time. Forgive us our sins, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, kind sir. It was a real pleasure catching up with you again. I hope to be able to do it again in the future to talk about some other topics that might be pressing, and to get the message out there. So look, I really appreciate it, Christopher, and I hope you have a blessed rest of your day, and all the best.
Thank you, Mark.